What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to implement Tic Tac Toe using Turbo Streams. It should be pretty fun, and we should, at the end, have a multiplayer Tic Tac Toe game that we can play across different browsers. So I'm going to start off by just creating a brand new Rails application. So I'm going to say Rails new Tic Tac Toe, and we'll call this one V3, and we'll skip tests. And we're going to use Postgres. So I always get this error about not having the right Node version installed. So I'm going to jump into our directory here and use node env to update my local version of Node to a higher version. My globally installed one is a super old version of Node. It doesn't play well with Webpacker. But I'm going to say Rails Webpacker : install and rerun that bit. Now I'm going to open up package.json here. And there's a weird thing that happens with Webpack CLI being on an old version. And so I've found that I need to actually change this to 4.4.0. Not sure if that's something you'll run into. The next thing I want to do is go through the process of installing Turbo Rails. So I'm going to say bundle add turbo-rails. This will install the Turbo Rails gem and it will bundle install. Next, we're going to run Rails turbo : install. All right, that's going to set up Turbo inside of our application. You'll notice here at the very top, we see this message that says you must import hotwired Turbo Rails in your JavaScript entry point file. So let's open up application.js and import that here. That's going to wire up all of the front end pieces that we're going to need for listening to those WebSocket notifications on the client. We actually want to run Rails turbo install Redis to use Redis as our backing store. All right, let's fire up the Rails server, and we will also fire up our Webpack dev server. So we're going to run bin/webpack dev server to run the dev server. Then in another tab here, what I'm going to do is go back into this directory. I'm going to generate a new model. We're going to say Rails G model game, and all that game model is going to have is a single column called state for our game state, and then another column for our current symbol. And the idea is that we'll maintain all of the game state for Tic Tac Toe inside of this JSON blob, where we will have sort of rows and columns, and whether like what the symbols are in there. And then our current symbol will just be kind of like, what is the current, who's going next? Is it X or is it O? And that should be a good start. Okay, so let's open up, actually let's run the migration. So Rails db create, db migrate. Now we can open up the game class and take a look. So before validations, we want to sort of set up a default game state. And so we're going to say before validation on create, we want to set up the state. Self.state is equal to some hash where maybe we have the rows, and those are going to point at some columns, which will pre-populate with nil. So 0, 1, and 2. All right, so we've got our initial game state, and then our current symbol can be set up as maybe just like X or O dot sample. So we'll start off with some random symbol. And then inside of our game state, what we'll probably want to do is have a method called move, which will take in some like X and Y value or like row and column value. And we want to actually update the state in this case. So we'll say something like state at row.2s and column.2s is equal to whatever the current symbol is. And then we want to swap the current symbol so it turns out that it's a different, so the next player's turn. So internally, we're going to have something like this, where we might have like, if we were to make a move with, say, like 0, 0, then we want to sort of go into here at 0, 0 and set that value equal to whatever the current symbol is, basically. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's kind of like us making the actual move. The reason we want to call 2s on these is I expect that we're going to want to pass them in as integers sometimes, and sometimes as string values if we're receiving them from the front end. So we're going to convert them into strings and then use those as key values. Also, the underlying state object, when we store this JSON, it's going to store these as string keys instead of integer keys. So we're kind of just, yeah, we're using integers here, but they'll be stored as strings later on. So the next step here is to swap the current symbol, which we can do by saying like self.current symbol is equal to the thing that's not the current symbol. So current, if the current symbol is equal to x, then we want it to switch it to O, otherwise we want to switch it to X. So if it's not equal to X, we want to switch it to X, otherwise we want to switch it back to O. Then we want to call self.save bang here, and that should actually like make our move. So if we were to open up the Rails console and then create a new game, so we should be able to say g equals game.create, then we have a g.current symbol, and that should give us back some letter, so that gives us X. Then if we want to say like g.move, we can give it 0, 0. That should update the state and save it. And now g.current symbol should be O, and it is correctly O, so we're swapping the current symbol correctly. And then g.state does have 0, 0 populated with an X, and everything else is nil. So I think this is all working well enough that we can go talk about the next step. So let's generate a games controller. So we'll say Rails G controller games, and that's going to have an index and a show page. So we'll have like just a list of all the games, and then we'll have a show page that will have the game board, the actual game board, and you'll sort of copy and paste the game show page to someone else so they can play with you. So if we open up the games index here, this is going to have maybe a button, at least to start, we'll just have a button that says like new game or something. So we'll just say like new game. That'll send a post request to the games controller. And here we'll say at games is equal to game.all. At game is game.find params ID. And then in the case that we're going to create a new game, we want to, that was a little more than I wanted. What do we want to do? We want to say at game is game.create. I think that's fine. And then redirect to, actually we can just redirect to game.create. We have like no inputs or anything, so that should be fine for now. Let's also go to our routes and make sure that we have some of these set up. So resources, games, and then we'll route to games index. So if we land on the route, we should see games index. Okay, Webpacker is trying to compile stuff. Okay, so we see this new game button. When we click on the new game button, we are redirected to games/2, and we see the game show page. So let's go implement this. So on the game show page, this is going to have our actual game board. Now, when we're working with Turbo Streams, we actually want to like put the game board inside of some div that we can target by ID. So in this case, what I'm going to do is create a div with ID equal to the DOM ID for a given game. So actually we're going to use DOM ID. This is a helper method for pulling out the DOM ID for a given active record model. And inside of this div, we're going to render a partial for the game. So in order to render a partial, we need a new file, a new template, a view here called _game.html.erb. And this is where we will actually render out the game stuff. So I think what we want to do is something like 3 times do row and 3 times do column. And for the rows and columns, let's see. So for the rows, we want a like block level object. So we want a div, right? We're gonna have some like div, and for the, that's gonna be each row. Let's give it a class, row, and then inside of each column, inside those rows, we actually just want like a cell. So let's use a span, and we'll give this class cell. And in here, for now, we'll just put like an X. so that we can have something to look at on the page. We'll refresh the page here. We see all these X's. They look pretty good. Let's make them a little bigger though by modifying some SCSS. So game SCSS. So we're gonna write a little bit of CSS here for the row class, display flex. So the row is the container. We want that to be flex. And then the cell, we want that to flex grow 1, I think. And then let's make this have a border of like 1px solid red, just so we can see it on the view. Okay, cool. So this is sort of growing the full width. Let's make the row max width of like, I don't know, 300 pixels. If we refresh, that's looking pretty good. Now we want the height of the row to be maybe 100 pixels. I don't know if there's a better way to do this, but this is giving us a pretty good looking board. I actually want to maybe cut this in half, 150 and 50. Okay, and then let's also make it so that our cell is also using display flex so that we can put the content of the cell like smack in the middle. So display flex, and I think we want like justify content center. Great. Okay, and then I think we want justify items center or something. Oh gosh, what is it? How do I align them vertically centered? Let's see. Align items center. There we go, align items. Okay, so we've got, oh gosh, we're writing CSS, be careful. I don't actually know if this is if there's any best practices about CSS, I don't know them. So yeah, buyer beware when you're looking at CSS that I've written. But this should at least give us some cells. And then what we actually want is inside of those cells, we want the content from our game. So here we want to say something like, if there is something at that cell, so game.state row column. This is, okay, so something that's getting a little ugly is like reaching into the state and then passing in row and column here. So what I think I want to do is actually go back to the game class and add a little helper method here. So let's override the square bracket operator so that it accepts in the row and column. And then we can just use, then we should be able to just use the square bracket operator here and say pass in row and column. And that should give back state at row.toS and column.toS. That way we have one place where we can do sort of the input validation and cleanup. And then we also have this nice kind of like pretty square bracket operator thing. So if it's not nil, then we want to like actually put that content. Otherwise, if it is nil, then we want to do something else. So if it is not nil, then we want to print out whatever is inside there. Otherwise, I think we want something like a button, but we'll come back and look at that in a second, so that we have, just so that we have a sort of a placeholder. And now if we refresh the page, okay, so in this case, these are all going to be buttons, but we'll come back and mess around with those because we need a route that's going to handle our moves. So how are we going to keep track of our moves? Well, I think what we want to do, one option would be to go into the games controller here and add some method here, maybe like an update method to game or some other method to game, right? Where you could send in some specific, maybe you send in all the JSON to update the entire game or something like that. But I think I want to separate a game from a move. So let's go create a moves controller, Rails G controller moves. And our moves controller will be sort of, or like our move routes will be nested underneath game routes. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here I'm going to say do. So I'm passing now a block to the resources games here, where I'm going to nest resources moves, and I'm only going to support create. And that will make it so that we have this route that's like /games/1/moves that will accept post requests. And those post requests will create a move. So we'll go to the moves controller, and here we'll say def create. And we want to find the game. So we're going to say game.find params game ID. And the game ID we're going to get because it's nested under this route, right? So if this actually is game/4/moves, then this section of the path is going to be a dynamic segment where we will get access to this number in the params hash inside of the controller under game ID by convention. So once we have the game, we should be able to call @game.move, bang, and then pass in params row and params column, I think. And then I think what we want to do is say something like respond to do format. And if the format is HTML, then we will redirect to @game. Otherwise, we might want to also do some stuff with turbo streams, but we'll come back and take a look at that in a second. So let's see if we can get this working. So we want to go to game HTML ERB. We want to go into the partial. We're going to update this to be a button. So we're going to say button2 game.current symbol. And then this is going to send a post request to the game moves path, I think, for game. And the params are going to be row is going to be row, and column is going to be column. And the method is going to be post. All right, I think, let's see what happens. Oh, nice. Okay, all right, so we've got some buttons. When we click on the button, hey, look at that. It does update, and it's changing what the current symbol is, so we can sort of play tic-tac-toe. There's no actual like tracking if there's a winner or not, but at least things are sort of changing as expected here in the UI. Okay, so now what we want to do is make it so that we can play two games at once. So if we take our browser window here and we split it up, so now we have two browser windows. We actually want to go back to the games index and create a new game. This is going to be game 3. And at this point, what we want to start talking about is how we're going to update the other player's browser. So when I click on O here, it should mark this as O and change all the buttons to X. Right now, that's not happening unless we refresh the browser. And so we're going to talk about how we can use turbo streams to send that update directly to all of the browsers. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is go back to our game show path. This is where, again, we're rendering out that partial, and we want to register for some streams. So here we're going to say turbo stream from @game, and that's going to set up something special for us. So this will set up a turbo stream like listener for updates that are being published about game, and then inside of our turbo stream update that we're broadcasting, we're going to tell it how we want the DOM to change. Okay, so if we jump into our game control, our game model, and what we want to say is that like after create commit, we want to broadcast an update. Now broadcasting that update should send the turbo stream information that will target that specific DOM ID and should update that DOM. ID. So let's see if this was sort of just enough. So let's refresh the browser here in both places. Looks like we got some sort of notification. Okay, I think we're all right. You can also see in the server logs that like we upgraded to WebSocket, it's transmitting, it's streaming. Okay, so then if we click X here, all right, so that X is happening, but it's not actually changing over here. Oh, okay, I got the hook wrong. So this should be after update commit. After update commit, we want to broadcast an update. So not create commit, after update commit. So if we refresh both of these and then hit X on the bottom, now it's hitting X on the top. If we do an O on the bottom, or I'm sorry, an O on top, it should have updated the bottom here. So let's take a look at what's happening. So if we say inspect, we are expecting that has game 3 in it. Okay, that's right. And this one should also have inspect. This one should also have game 3, and it does. So why didn't that update get passed through to here? All right, so if we say O, X, O, X. Okay, so all of those worked. If we go back to games, we create a new game. We send it to our friend. And we say O on the bottom, and then X, and then O, and then X. Okay, why didn't this one update up here? I don't know. So this one says unsubscribing from channel, stopped streaming from there. So another thing we can do here is add format turbo stream, and then inside of our moves view, we can add a create. That's the same as the action. Then we can say turbo stream.erb. And inside of here, we can say turbo stream.update DOM ID for @game. Do render @game. All right, let's see if this works a little bit more stably. All right, games 7. So we're going to pull up game 7 here. We're going to click on the X, then the O, then the X, then the O, then the X, then the O, then the X, then the O, and this is much more stable and consistent. So there's a couple different pieces here. So what we did was we set it up to automatically broadcast out when we updated the game state, and then we set up a listener to just automatically sort of update this board as we were playing. So this is how you implement tic-tac-toe, or one way that you can implement tic-tac-toe with turbo streams. One thing I want you to do is go out and actually implement the logic for telling who won the game. The other thing that might be cool to add is maybe like custom symbols, and keeping track potentially of who is X and who is O. So head out and play around with turbo streams. They're super fun, and yeah, it's a great way to make real-time applications with Ruby on Rails. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.